准备一下。
Well, now I feel like a loser for teasing you.
That's okay.
So let's begin by going to God in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for your great love for us, and thank you for watching over us and keeping us safe, Father. Pray that the study tonight encourage us. I pray that it give us stamina for the tasks that you set before us, Father. And I pray it help us to run the race with diligence to win the prize, Father. Thank you for having forgiven our sins and bring us home to you. In Jesus' name, amen. We are in chapter 11, and I'm excited about chapter 11 because guess what comes after chapter 11?
12.
Chapter 12. That's exciting as well. So we're going to look this evening at the stuff surrounding Lazarus. Joe, could I have you pass these out? We'll end up doing them, I'm sure. So, chapter 11. And John is going to reference stuff and move around a little bit to some different places. But we'll talk about that. So, now a certain man was ill, Lazarus, of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair. Whose brother Lazarus was ill. At what point do you guys think Mary is going to anoint Jesus and wipe his feet and all that stuff? Chapter 12. Good job. That's pretty awesome, right? So he's alluding to this as he's talking about what's going on here. He's pointing you to that because for some reason John wants you to have in your mind that this event is what he's leading up to, right? So those I have on the paper that is being handed out to you, I have 4 documentations of this event in Scripture. And you'll hear some people say that that's not the case, and that's okay. We'll talk about that and why we're supposed to, that they're all the same event. And it's okay if you don't agree with me. You don't have to agree with me. It's okay. I sometimes don't agree with them. But I have Bible-based reasons why you believe what you believe. So verse 3, so the sisters sent to him, what sisters? Name the sisters. Mary and Martha, right? So the sisters sent to him, that is to Jesus, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness will not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. Does Jesus know the outcome of the scenario? Absolutely, right? So now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so he hurried to get there as quick as he could.
No.
What's that?
No.
Oh, I messed that up? I do think it's interesting because and this is one of those beautiful things that goes to show too that the Bible is not fiction. Because if you were writing fiction, what would be the natural progression of this sentence?
Oh, he rushed there.
Right, it'd be he loved them, so he hurried. I want you to notice that he loved them, so he did what? So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer. This is interesting because it'll turn out that Lazarus will die. When he shows up, they'll say, he's been in the grave for 4 days. Don't get him out of there. He's been in there for 4 days. Which means Jesus could have come immediately, and what would have been the case? But he would have only been 2 days dead. He wouldn't have been stinky. He just would have been like, an old locker stinky. He wouldn't be a casket stinky. Right? He would have been stinky enough. So this is interesting because what you find is Jesus willfully put them in a situation where there was no doubt in their mind. Sometimes back then, sometimes people would die and they wouldn't be sure they were dead. Maybe they just got real bad off. And so he's removing that thought so that when he does raise Lazarus, nobody can be like, he was stinky, but it wasn't that stinky. Maybe he just hadn't showered for a couple of days. He's putting him in the realm of, no, there's no mistaking that smell. Right? So it says, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer. And it's interesting that love motivated Jesus to not come immediately, right? To the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." And the disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you were going to enter there again?" I want you to notice another thing too. Jesus doesn't do what is economic. Well, I should say his economics are different than our economics. If somebody picks a fight with you and doesn't want you around and causes you to, like, let's stone the guy, what do we want to do? Stay away from them. And even if we don't run from them, we don't want to go back and like hang out, right? And so I want you to notice Jesus is willing to put himself in hostile territory, but his priorities are they're not priorities based on convenience. He's not seeking to do the most convenient thing, right? Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in a day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not on him." After saying these things, he said to them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to wake him." Does Jesus know what he's going to do? And he's talking with the confidence of someone who's like, this is not a big deal.
And
Right?
he'd already told him that he was going to be dead.
Right. Absolutely. Right.
He said the sickness will not end in death.
Yep. And the disciples said to him, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll recover." Of course, do people fall asleep? Are some of the people in this room right now falling asleep? Right? So, if someone falls asleep, do you get scared? If you walk in the room and you see a body in the couch and it just appears to be lifeless, you would get scared unless you have teens. And then you just realize, oh, they're sleeping, right? You pick up the arm and it drops, and you go, oh, they're just sleeping, right? Kind of a thing. So, people recover from sleep, right? Now, Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he meant taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, guys, right? And for your sake, I'm glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. Let us go to him." If he has to say, "so that you may believe," is there a problem with their current status? Something about their faith is not really believing. So we're going to investigate that. And we're going to see how many places and how many people that actually is branching out to as we go here. So Thomas called the twins said to his fellow disciples, "Let us go that we may be sure he gets proper medical attention." So notice Thomas's response. It's really kind of out of nowhere. He said, "Let us go that we may die with him." So what does Thomas think they're going to do? Well, if Lazarus is dead, and we're going there, and these people want to stone us, guess what? I guess this is the end. We're all going to go die together. And so that's the great point of noble virtue for Thomas. Now, you and I benefit greatly from having been way, way, way past this, so we can look back and is Jesus in charge of life and death. We know that. How do we know that? Because of stories like Lazarus's. Do you notice something missing from all the stories we've had up until chapter 11? What miraculous thing had Jesus not done yet? Raise the dead. So it's easy to look back and say, "Oh, you knuckleheads." But it's a little bit, I give them some grace if they're in this situation and they haven't dealt with the Jesus raising the dead thing. They know Jesus can cause the blind to see and the lame to walk and the deaf to hear. And they're like, okay, I get it, I can digest that. So then really the point where we tonight can grow greatest is by asking ourselves the question, what is the thing, if we think about it, that we think, well, this is the boundary of what Christ can do? Because that's what they were faced with. They thought, it's clear from Thomas's stance, they thought, we're not going there to raise the dead. It'd be one thing if Lazarus, broke his arm. It'd be one thing if he was, got something in his eye, lost an eyeball or something like that. It'd be one thing if there was some kind of wound that you can survive, but here is a scenario where he can't even survive. I guess all we're going there to do is die with him. Right? I mean, that's what Thomas's thought is, isn't it?
Yeah, Jesus told him he was gonna wake him up.
I agree with you, right? That's the craziness is they're standing there with him. They've heard Jesus talk about other stuff and then do it and put his money where his mouth is, right? But there's clearly some level of, well, but he can't do that going on in their minds, right? I mean, there must be something, because that's what Thomas thinks. We're not going to.
Yeah, we're fighting two things. We're fighting possibly being stoned to death and then confronting, Lazarus and his family. So there's two things that are tugging at the group, right?
Right.
So Thomas is thinking this customer's last stand.
Right. Right. Well, and it's interesting because when we play, I don't know, you don't have to give yourself away, but if you want to do me a favor, raise your hand if you've ever played a shoot 'em up video game. A couple of us have played a shoot 'em up video game, right? So it's interesting in a shoot 'em up video game, right? The first person shooters or whatnot, you go out there and you shoot a bunch of stuff, and then about 5 seconds into it, what happens? You die. But that's okay, because what can you do? Respawn, right? And then you run out there and you shoot a couple more things, and then what happens? And it's interesting how brave you live if you know you can respawn. Right? When you don't know you can respawn, in real life, would you do warfare, anything like in a video game, in real life? There is no respawn in real life, right? So it's interesting because here Jesus is going to go and bring this guy back to life, and I'm just saying, you could walk with the boldness and the bravery. If you believed in the Jesus who can raise your body from the dead, you can be crazy brave about your faith. If you know, that's okay, Jesus can fix that. Right? That's my thought as a guy who has played some first-person shooter video games. My thought is, Jesus can fix that. Right? Yes, ma'am?
I was wondering about Thomas's attitude about, we'll go die with him. Was he talking about dying with Lazarus?
I think so.
But Lazarus died by sickness.
So it doesn't say, it says he was ill, right?
Yeah.
But I don't want to go so far as to add a bunch of stuff to it. But I will say it appears to me to be, from Thomas's perspective, that there could have been malintent possibly in the death of Lazarus. Maybe he was poisoned or was what?
Spanish says in the first verse, now a certain man was sick.
Right. So it doesn't get into the details of it. But it's interesting because the way Thomas speaks, I could definitely see Thomas. I'm not saying he did. I'm not being dogmatic on it in any way. I'm just saying I could see Thomas looking at Lazarus and thinking something mischievous happened with him. And what we will find out after Lazarus is raised from the dead, what do the people want to do with Lazarus? Kill him. Right? There is a hostility toward the followers of Jesus, and we've seen that go through this whole thing. There's a hostility toward the followers of Jesus. But in any event, whether it was just a natural illness or whether it was a brought-on illness by something, the Bible doesn't say one way or another. But Thomas's view is, I agree with Mark, this is Custer's last stand. Okay, he's dead, not much we can do about that. What are we going to go do? I guess start a riot and get ourselves killed. Who knows what?
Were they going into hostile territory?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, back in verse 6.
Only 8. Yeah, 8.
The disciple said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you're going there again?
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're absolutely going back into hostile territory. Verse 17, now when Jesus came, he found Lazarus had already been in the tomb for how long?
4 days.
4 days, right? The tomb was right. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. So we learn a thing here, by the way. I don't want to use those markers.
Yeah.
What?
No. We learned something here. There's a span or distance.
Right.
Right.
So how far away is Bethany from Jerusalem?
2 miles.
Less than 2 miles.
Walking distance.
Okay. So we know that they're within walking distance, right? Within a brisk walk. What's that? A half hour, you said?
The road was kind of rocky, but maybe an hour.
Right. But and back then I just am suspicious they walked more than us, right?
Oh, yeah.
So this was nothing. A little 2 mile walk is nothing, right? It's basically just a suburb. And it says, Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So, when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary remained seated in the house. So, where does Martha go?
Out to meet Jesus.
She's going out to meet Jesus. Where's Mary? She's back, and I'm suspicious she's back at the house, kind of in at least the same community as where the tomb is for Lazarus. It may not be right next door, but it's probably in the same community, right? Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been there, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Now this looks like a reasonable faith, but here's the deal. She's saying, if you'd been here, you wouldn't have died. I just want to point out, is there some tone of blaming going on?
Right.
I think so. I think so. With that, she has like, I think like many of us, she's got 2 practical thoughts running through her mind that are warring with each other. One is, God, this is kind of your fault. And then the other is, God, you're the only one who can fix this. Right? So you almost get something that looks like good solid faith from her, but why did Jesus stay in the first place? Why did he stay an extra 2 days in the first place? You remember? Said because, back in verse 5. Now Jesus, what? Loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer. So something about love motivated him to not come help. Is it possible that sometimes when we don't get the help that we think we need, life and death scenario, and we don't get the help we need, is it possible that sometimes God is loving us by not fixing it? Right? So, Martha says, Lord, if you'd been here, you would not have died, but even now, whatever you ask from God, God will give you. So there's this wrestle going on in her. Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. And it's interesting because this goes to show, I think this next piece of dialogue here reveals the faith of Martha. Because he says your brother will rise again, and what is Jesus talking about? He's talking about right now. We're going to do this thing. What does Martha think he's talking about? At the end of the world and everything, the consummation of all things, the resurrection. Do you see what I'm saying?
But she knew her scripture.
Right.
Just saying.
Right. She knew that there was a resurrection of the dead. And so she was trying to give the right answer as best as she could. But I just want to point out, she just got done saying, whatever you ask, God will do. If you believed whatever Jesus asked God he would do, what would you ask Jesus to do? Bring him back. Jesus, can you just bring him back to life? I mean, that seems like a logical thing. Unless you think Jesus can't do that. You see what I'm saying? So I'm suspicious that her faith, this was the thing in her mind, well, I've seen him do a lot of stuff, but that's kind of asking too much. He can't really do that. And we do this when we see people or we know people in our family that are messed up and they've just flippantly thrown God to the side, and we deal with them and we deal with them, and then we get tired of dealing with them, and we just say stuff like, well, whatever, it's never, that person, it'll never happen. Jesus wants to see all souls saved, but that person, it's not happening for that person. If you were like me, there are people, probably about 4 or 5 people in your mind that you can think, yeah, it's not happening for that person. You may not want to say that out loud. But here's the deal. Can the power of Christ do more than what you think it can do? Can the power of Christ surprise you? Or where do you put the boundaries on his power? Right? So, yeah.
It said in 4 that, no, it's for God's glory. So it's God's Son to be glorified through it. And to me, her heart is saying, well, I know about the resurrection. What are you talking about? Right? Because it said they all kind of misunderstood sleeping versus being raised, you know?
Right.
So I kind of think of it like she's asking for clarification. I know the resurrection is not the same thing we're talking about. And then that opens the door for him to explain more about what he for me in this scripture, that he is the resurrection and the life.
Oh,
So, yeah, exactly. So to me, I'm thinking that Martha, her by opening the door, this is his first chance to define resurrection and to show that that is really why he came. He didn't just come to heal the blind and the lame.
Right.
He came for a bigger purpose,
Right.
right? And so I think that that opens the door for him to show God's glory.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with you 100%. I don't think she has a bad definition of resurrection.
Yeah, I think she's just unclear, and frankly, she's never seen that before, right?
Right. That would be my suspicion.
That would be a good term to define.
Right. And I do think that she's right in saying, I know there will be resurrection on the last day.
Right.
Do you guys agree that that's the thing? I think her definition isn't inherently wrong, but it isn't the same thing Jesus is talking about here. And I agree with you. I think there's a number of scenarios in the Bible where we see God proving his authority in a specific scenario. So when Jesus is baptized, he comes out of the water, led by the Holy Spirit into the wilderness, and there's three things the devil tempts him with. One of them is and all three of those things that he tempts him, those things are challenges to his authority. So one of the things that he tempts him with is he says, take this rock and make it into what? Bread. When he does that, the devil is challenging his authority over the natural world. Right? He's like, if you were God, you could make what you want out of what you want. I don't know what happened there, but so that's not an interruption. Anyway, no, no, no. So, sorry for the folks that are like, oh, that just was abrupt. Oh, well, that's the value of being here. So, there's the challenge of Jesus' authority over the physical world when he says, turn the stone into bread. Both those things are physical, right? And it's for the purpose of meeting what kind of a need?
Well, it's all said.
A physical need, right? So, physical stuff over a physical need. I think the second one, if I remember correctly, I won't say second because I even think that there's one of the versions that actually swaps the order of the things that take place. But one of the things that happen as well, there's the turning stone into bread. There's the casting yourself down. And when he says, take yourself up to the pinnacle and throw yourself down, who's supposed to come catch you? Angels. So he's testing Jesus' authority over the spiritual world as well. Tested over the physical world, tested over the spiritual world. And then the last one was, just bow down to me. All authority under heaven has been given to me. I can give it to who I want. You bow down to me, worship me, and what will I do? What's the devil say? I'll give you all the worship and the praise of these people. I'll just direct them right onto you. Now here's what's interesting. Why did Jesus come to earth in the first place? To collect all the praise and the glory and the honor and have every need, so that every knee will bow and tongue will confess, right? It's interesting. So the devil challenges Jesus' authority over the physical realm with the bread and the rock. He challenges Jesus' authority over the spiritual realm with, say, an angel pick you up. And he challenges Jesus' authority over humanity. When he says, all authority has been given me, I can give to him what? I'll have them bow down to you if you just fall down and worship me. I'll let you get to the end with, pass and go. You don't have to go to the cross. You can have everybody worship me by just worshiping me. Do you see what a unique temptation that would be for Jesus? That's what he came here to get. And Jesus, the devil's saying, I'll give you a shortcut. But that's not a shortcut Jesus is willing to take. Right? So it's interesting because I propose to you as well, you have those, for instance, is those three were Jesus making statements over his authority in different scenarios. And I propose to you, this is Jesus making a statement over life and death, saying, I have authority over life and death as well. Has he proven that he has authority to heal? Right? Over the senses. Yeah. This is him proving he's got authority over life and death. That he's the one who's in charge of who lives and who dies, and that he can actually raise the dead. And so, I think that's the element of when Jesus says, it's so that God's glory will be made known. I think that's what's going on here, is Jesus saying, God's glory will be made known when people realize I can actually control life and death. In a way that nobody else can. Does a doctor have any control at all? And I mean even the slightest amount of control over life and death. I propose to you a little bit, but it isn't very great. Like a doctor can point you in the right direction for some medication. And if you get food poisoning and you don't take the advice of the doctor, you can go ahead and sit there and die. but it is not a miracle style life and death capacity.
That's what I would even say it's not even a little bit. Because, I mean, doctors, work in the realm of what has worked in the past.
Right. Right.
I know when we're going through our stuff, my doctor was shocked that the outcome was different.
Amen.
Because that's not the normal path of what he has seen before.
Right.
And so he's going like, I don't know why.
Right.
But he does,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so who has, at the very least, if we put doctors in Jesus, who has actual authority over life or death? Jesus. That's not even a complicated thing, right? So Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, shall yet live. And by the way, it's interesting. This is why I say this is an example of Jesus saying, I have power over life and death, because what will happen to Lazarus later on? He'll die. What's going to happen to every believer? And he says, though he believed in me, he lived. What happens to every believer from then on? Still die. So when I can look at this isn't Jesus guaranteeing that you're going to never die. This is Jesus saying, I have power. If you do die, I can bring you back. This is improving that. Right? So he says, whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's come into the world. Notice that her answer is kind of running away from the actual question. What is Jesus asking if she believes?
It is power.
And what does she say? Yeah, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world. Okay, that wasn't, I just want to point out, that wasn't the question Jesus asked. Did you notice that? Verse 28.
But kind of
Yeah.
is, don't you think? Because the Son of God, she acknowledges that he is the Son of God, and he is the Christ, who is the Messiah, who's going to save them. And the Son of God would have dominion over life and death, right? She doesn't answer it. I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying, but I kind of feel like by saying that you are the Son of God, she also answers it, if that makes sense. Because she proclaims his dominion over life and death.
And she claims that she understands.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see this as a whimpering, like sometimes we answer in a muddled voice. I think she says, I believe you are the Messiah, the
Right.
Son of God. I mean, and it's a fact.
Well, and I think everything she says she believes. But I just will say it's precarious that I don't see anywhere in here her saying, you are going to raise him right now. I did see a statement where she says, yes, everybody's going to be raised on the last day. But I don't see anything that she says that indicates you can bring his dead body back to life today.
And are you saying that that's a hardness of her heart?
I don't know.
She's not- or
I
she's
think it's a
not
wrestle.
at- That
So-
she's not at a spot where she can even admit that.
I
What are
think
you proposing?
I think in each of our hearts, right, the best I can do is associate with what I know about myself. And I have discovered from myself that sometimes I think I know the right answer to say, God is all powerful, he can do anything he wants. But then I see places in my life where I think, I didn't realize I thought it when I make the statement, God is all powerful, he can fix any problem. But then I look at some problems and I'm like, in the back of my mind, I'm kind of like, I don't know if God can fix that. When I'm conscious of it, I'm like, of course he can fix that. But I live sometimes in a way that doesn't give stuff over to God. I heard somebody today come up to me at the end of the sermon, and he said, here's all this stuff that's happening, and it's terrible stuff. And he said, I almost came up to the front and I was going to ask for the prayers of the congregation. He said, but I didn't because I know the congregation's prayers are always with me. Here's the problem with that line of reasoning. And maybe this is why this thing got off. Maybe you're watching. I don't know. But the problem with that kind of reasoning is, the Bible says you don't have because you don't ask.
Right.
So this guy says, here's all these issues that I'm personally afflicted with. I wanted to ask for prayers, but I didn't because, I know those prayers are happening. They're not. If people don't know about them, they're not happening. Right? And so it's like we keep little things back that we know God can fix, but we feel silly putting them before Him for some reason. kind of what I think she knows that, yes, Jesus can do anything, but she's also wrestling with giving him everything to deal with, giving him all of her problems to deal with, yeah.
Yeah, so same thing, I think if somebody's asking for prayers, and they just say, I need some prayers. We can
For what?
pray generally for that person,
Right.
but if you know exactly what's going on with that person, those are specific prayers, which I think are more powerful.
Right, I think absolutely too. If you can pray for the specific, there is something up with not putting your needs, if you have a resource for getting your problem solved, but you're not willing to use that resource to get your problem solved, and then you're confused that your problem doesn't get solved, right? We would never do that, right? Yes, sir.
So I think, all you're trying to do is just bring out the thought process, right?
Right.
And it can be, it's hard to put ourselves back in that place. But I think you're fixing to go there, and in verse 39, she's like, yeah, but Lord, he's really dead. He's
Right.
dead. He's been dead for a little while.
Right.
So you kind of see the hesitation, and again, if we take from the perspective that they haven't seen it happen,
Right.
and then you go back and say, how do we typically deal with that? If God hasn't helped us in a certain situation,
Right.
quite oftentimes, we say, well, when all else fails, let's pray. That is typically our mentality, right? When it should be flipped around and say, no, you pray first and then do whatever you can,
Right.
right? So, and this is where I would see, Martha, that could be the potential.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where I'm going with it,
Yeah.
is
But I think this is hitting both sides as far as looking in him, right? And following Christ. He makes a statement that I'm gonna raise your brother, right?
right.
And he's actually gonna do it twice.
Make the statement.
No, he's actually gonna raise.
Going to raise the price. Well,
Right.
and he's mentioned, he's even said, I'm doing this right now. He's made really a statement in hindsight, you can see as,
Right.
no, he said he's doing this today,
Right,
twice even, and they're still
Twice
like
before.
kicking back against it.
right. But at the same time, in verse 25, and I think this is where some of the misunderstanding, or maybe some of the rub, is that, what is he talking about in verse 25? Is he talking about raising Lazarus now? Or is he talking about resurrection in general?
Right.
For all of us,
Right.
right? And for me, 25 talks about resurrection for all of us,
I think so.
right?
Well,
And so-
I think he's
and
got
so-
double, yeah.
Well, yeah, and so the thing is, we know that he's talking about a double thing, because he's saying, I'm gonna raise him now,
Right,
but he is also gonna be raised
right, right.
later on. And so as we walk through this, then that realization of it's gonna happen today, because he's already said it twice before,
Right.
right? But like what Adrian mentioned, going into this gives Jesus the opportunity to make the true broad statement
Right.
of resurrection.
I agree. Well, the whole thing is, the whole reason he raises him isn't because he's got nothing to do today, but he feels like raising Lazarus. The whole reason he raises him anyways, I agree with you. It's a
Yeah,
statement
it's
about resurrection.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting, we talk about double meanings. So Saturday we're at lunch. Raise your hand if you went to men's breakfast. A couple of us, right?
I wasn't at lunch, but I was at breakfast.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, we stayed. Once you said that you're paying for it, we just kept eating, right? But those of us who are at men's breakfast, we're getting ready to leave, and Mark grabs the tickets and he says, your debt has been paid. I'm suspicious that Mark didn't just say that about our bill, he was making a tongue-in-cheek statement about what's going on with Christ as well, right?
Amen.
And I think, tongue-in-cheek may not be the right word, but I think this is what Jesus is doing here, that there is a statement about the end game, but there's also a statement about what Jesus is going to do here on this
Right.
day. Yeah. 28, when she said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and calling for you. I want to show you something interesting. Now remember, how far were they away? When Mary went out to meet Jesus, about how far were they? About 2 miles away. So this is what's interesting, because what you'll discover here, if you notice the way the text reads, is that Martha comes out and meets Jesus about 2 miles away, has some dialogue with him, and then leaves him 2 miles back, goes back into town and gets Mary and says, Jesus wants to talk to you. And there's no indication that Jesus said that, although I don't doubt that it's true. But Jesus doesn't say, go get your sister. She just leaves Jesus and goes and gets her sister. It it says in verse 29, and when she heard it, she rose quickly and what? Went to him. Where's Jesus headed?
There.
So I just want to point out that Jesus is 2 miles away. Can Jesus walk? Do you think Jesus can walk as fast as Martha? Who is he letting outrun him?
The woman on the mission.
The woman on the, right? So I'm suspicious that Jesus is still keeping a facade of casualness about this. He's still kind of taking his time to get there. Because she's got time to go to town and say you good. I'm suspicious that she is kind of like, dude, he's taking forever, you've got to go get him.
30, it says Jesus quit walking, he just hung out where he met Martha.
Right,
He didn't even go to the next.
right. It's like, what is going on? It's really bizarre, right? Yeah, it says, when the Jews who were with her in the house, verse 30, sorry. Now, Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in a place where Martha met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, what? Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. I just want to point out I'm suspicious that there was a group of people and phrases start going around and we say, what happened with this? By the way, when anybody dies, you know what people say? They say, what happened? How did they die? The thing that we lose sleep over is when we don't understand why a person died. If we just wake up and somebody's dead in their bed, guess what we want to know? What is going on? And we start talking together and we start getting suspicious. Maybe they had a heart attack, maybe they had this, maybe this, maybe this. Guess what was going around their table? If Jesus would have been here,
This would have never happened.
this would have never happened. So there is a little bit of what appears to me to be some kind of a blame game going on. Do Martha and Mary and Lazarus love Jesus? Yes. Can somebody you love hurt your feelings and let you down? Do they feel like Jesus has maybe let them down? They send him a text? That was Martha's question about that, right? Right. So, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And it's interesting because you've got this here. Did Jesus know what he was going to do with Lazarus? And there's of things that come to my mind. There's about 3 or 4 things that come to my mind for possible reasons why Jesus wept in this scenario. And probably the most common one that you hear is because when we weep, Jesus weeps, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. And Jesus, I think, does sympathize with us. And so some people say, well, Jesus is crying because they're all crying. Because it's a sad moment for all of them. Was it sad before this moment?
Yes.
I think so. Here's another thing. Maybe, perhaps Jesus, and I don't believe that this is true. Perhaps Jesus weeps because, you gotta forgive me, I'm not going to try to spell stuff. Because he's emotionally unstable. Right? Right? Maybe it's that. Maybe it's because he's emotionally unstable. I don't think that that's the case. Let me throw another idea at you. If you think back about his intent, he said the reason that he waited was because he loved them. And it appears to me that there's faith building going on. That Jesus has a strategy to build faith in them. And in an area where it appears to me that they might have a weakness. They may not even know it, but they might have a weakness in this area. And so Jesus looks, and Mary has come out, and she's, I think, the way that I read it, it seems like, not Mary, it seems like Martha, when she made the same statement, Martha has tilted her hand that she's weak in this area, believing that Jesus can do something about the dead today. And so then Mary comes out, and Mary makes the exact same statement Martha makes, and when Mary makes the exact same statement Martha makes, which is, if you'd have been here, this wouldn't have happened. I just want to point out, then what happens? What's the next thing that happens? When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who come with her also weeping, He's deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come see. And then Jesus did what? He wept. There may be a lot of things going on. I don't think this is one at all. This is a silly one, right? Clearly. But I certainly do think that Jesus weeps when we weep, and he's compassionate in those things. But I'm also suspicious that perhaps Jesus looked at this and thought, Martha, I love you, and I expect more of you. I expect you to know that I can raise the dead today, not just at the resurrection. Mary, I expect you to know that I can raise the dead today, not just at the resurrection. And both of them came back with the same thing, which was, if you'd have been here, wouldn't have happened. So it's almost like they've got a unity in what I perceive to be a subtle inference of their disbelief of what Jesus could do.
There's also that disbelief, at least in Thomas, in what he said, that we're going to go with him and die with him.
Right. Yeah,
Because if he actually believed that Jesus couldn't go there, raise from the dead, and people weren't going to stone him, then he wouldn't have said what he said.
Well, and I think he's going to say, either going to say or said, for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't here. Right? Has he already said that, or is he going to say that?
You already said that, that was in 14.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah, 14. Right? For your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there. Whose sake was he saying that? Was that Mary Martha's?
When he was talking to his disciples, when he said that.
Right.
And it's because there's doubt there. Even after Jesus goes to the cross and he dies, there's still doubt there until they see him again.
Right.
And we're not there yet. But
Right.
It all had to happen for them to have that strong faith, strong enough. And I think it had to happen that way for them to go out and start teaching.
Right.
With the faith that they had.
When, do you think maybe it's possible that Jesus wants to produce in us faith that can weather any storm? I think so. Right?
Let's see that these were examples so that you might believe. and
For us?
Go forward. Even for them, with being there, seeing them raise, raise Lazarus.
Oh, for sure. Anything Jesus is doing here, I'm convinced, because he's even going to pray, and it's going to say something like, not that you guys have to hear, but I want you to hear so that you know that I'm talking to God. It's something, I don't remember how he words it. Where is it at? Verse 42. He says, I know that you always hear me, but I say this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you've sent me. So everything he's doing is strategic in its nature. And what is his desire to produce?
Followers.
Belief. Right? He wants to produce a belief that cannot be shaken. Right? And I'm suspicious, it looks to me like Mary and Martha had belief, but it was a belief that could be shaken under just the right circumstance where their brother, for instance, might die. That it just might shake their belief. So like I said, what is the thing that might have you say, well, but God can't do anything about that?
Do we do the same thing?
Oh, yeah.
I think yes. Right.
I mean, are we any different? So, and we say yes, and then we say we believe until we become, deathly ill,
Right.
and then where's your faith?
Right. Right.
No different.
Absolutely. And I think we do this with illnesses. I think we do this with relationships. I think we do this with property. If our house and everything burns down, if everything you own, if you had a Reading fire run through your house.
God gave us an example, 8 years ago. We had a big fire in the mountain. A lot of people had to start displacing their homes.
Right.
And sometimes we do.
Right.
We step back and say, yeah, God, it's all yours, except for this. You know what? Not today,
Amen.
but tomorrow.
Amen. Right. Exactly. And I think that's the war that we've got each within us. We believe, but then it's possible, I will say, but I've seen in my own life, there have been things that I realized, I'm hanging on to this more than I should. If it was a war between this and God, I'm not entirely sure who would win. I've had to take stuff out of my life because I thought, I don't want that to win the war. Right? If there's a wrestle between a thing and God, I want that winning, and I got to get rid of that thing. If that's in my life, guess what you got to do? Got to get rid of that. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not the one who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? And I want to point out, they're still stuck on a concept of preventative care. And they don't realize that Christ isn't in the business of preventative care, he's in the business of restoration care. He likes to take things and make them, what? The Bible says he makes all things new. They're thinking he can repair some stuff. No, he likes to make all things new. So what can he do with a dead body? You can make it new, right? Amen. So, then Jesus leaving the moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. And Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there's going to be an odor, for he's been dead for 4 days." And Jesus said to her, "Jesus, don't you remember what I said? Right? Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" They took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they might believe that you sent me." When he had said these things, he cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" And it's interesting. I don't want to get heavily into it, but it's an interesting concept. The phrase "come out" in the Greek is actually return. Lazarus, return! And so there's some that make really interesting studies on the concept that he's not asking Lazarus to step out of the tomb, but he's calling for Lazarus' soul to return to his body. And that's, they're reinforced that by the fact that what do they have to do with Lazarus when he comes back alive? Jesus tells them to go do a thing to Lazarus. Set him free. Right? When he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out," or "come back." The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound, and you could also say came back, his hands and his feet bound with linen strips, his face wrapped with cloth. And Jesus said to them, do what? Who brings life to the dead? But what does Jesus ask us to do?
Let him go.
Amen. Those who are captive unto death, who produces the life back in the person? I'm talking on a sin level. Who causes the dead to come back to life? Jesus. But what does he employ us to do?
To help.
Right? I think it's interesting that Jesus, that Lazarus wasn't without the need of help from a human in this scenario. That Jesus incorporated purposely, I think, because I'm unsuspicious Jesus making a statement about the gospel. Right? That it is the case, Jesus could go around and just get everybody right and fix everybody up and just have everybody live. But he chose to incorporate us and have us. God brings the life, but we've got to help unbind people. You see what I'm saying?
Interesting, when Jesus died and was raised, nobody takes off his grave clothes.
Amen, sister. What a great...
We're at a great point.
What's that?
I said, I have my once.
Amen. Amen. Fantastic. No, you gave me goosebumps. That's huge. I've noticed that. But yeah, no person goes and unbinds Jesus. He just is there, and the Bible says about his linen that it was folded neatly. He's a responsible guest in the tomb. He's like, let me put my things away.
Mary was
Bye.
a good mother.
Right. Mary was a good mother.
And they were clean.
Amen. So,
Well, and that goes back to, again, Jesus, he instructs them to do things, roll the stone away, and he calls out to them and then asks them, to help Lazarus out. And so, you're thinking from Lazarus' point of view too, he's awakened. And there's probably going like, what in the world, right? Have I gotten myself into?
like when he wakes up and sees the back of linen.
Right,
Yeah.
which, coincides kind of like what you were saying with those that are in sin, right?
Right.
What kind of nonsense?
He's got them tied up. They
That's
can't
right.
even help themselves.
Right.
That's right. And that's, by the way, too, that's one of the arguments against the idea of come out, the phrase come out, because come out suggests he had the ability to sit up and get up and then get to coming out. Just, people imagine the mummy thing doing this ridiculous thing.
But he was a daddy.
He was when they take folks, I don't know what to do by daddy, but,
Mommy.
Daddy instead of mom.
oh. But, you know, when they tie people up, they didn't tie them up like when you and I, like, maybe we're gonna play mummy in a skit. We purposely leave enough looseness in there to be comfortable to the person and so they can breathe. If you're going to actually mummy somebody, you don't leave them room for the chest to breathe and for the legs to move enough and for the person to bend. And then on top of that, you're packing all the spices over them too, which they're basically in a cast by the time you're done. They're not getting up and walking around. And so that's why when he says, verse 44, now the man who had died, in the ESV it says, came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips. I don't think this is, I think you could portray this as being like, you know, what your kids do when they're just playing cowboys and Indians, and that's not the comfort that he was in this stuff. It is, he is bound and he can't set himself free. But guess who he needs help from? He got life back from Jesus, but he still needs help from people. And I think that's what we are in the body of Christ, is we are those people who unbind those who are in death clothes. You know. So, many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did what? What was Jesus' objective to produce? Belief. Amen. But some of them went out to the Pharisees. I don't understand what some people do. You know, people always talk about some people. This is where they get it from, right? Well, some people say this is that some people. You notice some people are always the worst people, right? But it says, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, what are we to do? This man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. And I'm just thinking, amen. If Jesus keeps doing what he's doing, guess what people are going to do? Believe in him. Amen. Right? But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, you don't know nothing. Nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should